Welcome back to ReadingBear. Today, we will take a look at some new malicious compliance stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
The first one is titled, "Shitty Manager Calls Me In Despite Flu. Enjoy your sick days off, boys." So a bit of background first. I joined a bank and after a few months we had a management change in the division. The new division head brought some of the guys from his previous bank. Usually that's how it works in banks in my country. But the prickle was that he treated the old team members like crap and his boys were spending time surfing the net and presenting others' work to the management as their own. So since I was in their shit list, I was given slack on trivial issues, despite having workload that made me spend 3 to 3.5 hours overtime daily, and no, I was not getting overtime. I went down with flu one day and called in sick. The manager called me and asked me to come in anyways as there was a big presentation due to be presented to the management by the head. I went to work, prepared the data and reports, went to the manager's cabin to show him the report. I made sure I sneezed into his face without even making an effort to put my hand or anything else near my face. After a couple of huge loud sneezes, I could see the semi-liquid boogers spread on the face of the boss and the report papers. I did similar things on the workstations of his trophy boys as well, when I was talking to them about the weather. Midday, I was told by my head to email him the reports and presentation slides and take the rest of the day off, also, not to come to office unless I am fully recovered. After a few days off, the flu turned out to be typhoid. When I joined back after the sick leave, I was told most of the boys had worked with a flu in the office. Since I was already down, they couldn't afford day off. Overall, spent 2 shitty years at that bank, resigned and moved on to another bank in a way that was prime pro-revenge stuff. Might be posting about it there. The next one is titled, "You Only Get Paid for 37.5 hours work." Okay, I'll only stay for that long. So I worked as an executive pastry chef for a medium-sized hotel here in England where we catered mainly to weddings at weekends but had a successful restaurant that ran alongside it doing 2/3 rosette quality food, about 60 covers a night. Well, as anybody who has worked in catering may know, it's not uncommon to work a tremendous amount of hours in a week on a consistent basis. Here I was working about 75 to 80-ish hours a week, 5 days of about 14/15 of an hour, then an extra 5/6 or so on my day off. Now it's important to know that we did not get paid for overtime here as chefs. You worked all of these hours and you got paid for 37.5 hours. That's 40 hours in work where they took 30 minutes off for 5 days for a lunch break that you never ever had. You do all this and life sucks doing it, but it's a job and it's not easy in catering at the best of times. So the straw that broke the camel's back comes when I get pulled by the finance manager because I left on one of those days after 5 hours. You see, they ran their weeks Thursday to Wednesday for pay and rota etc. I left on a Thursday to go look after a family member on my day off that I'd already gone into work to help out on. But because it was a Thursday and the start of the week, I hadn't done enough hours in that week to justify leaving early. Me explaining that it was 1. My day off, really, 2. I had worked 45 hours between Monday to Wednesday, and 3. I didn't get paid for any extra work. Didn't seem to help. They got annoyed and said, "You get paid for 37.5 hours, no more. If you can't do your work in that time, then that's your problem, but you get paid no extra." Well, that played right into my hands. See, I mentioned above they had weddings at weekends and a busy restaurant that we used to have to service at the same time. If that sounds stupid and almost impossible, that's because it was. Well, the Saturday the following week was a big weekend for them, bank holiday, big wedding, full restaurant etc. So me and 2 of the other chefs decided we would work the 37.5 paid hours then leave. So we worked Thursday and Friday, racking up 31 paid hours there. Then Saturday we all had the full day shift, breakfast through till close. So we started at 6 AM and then 2 PM rolls around. Well, that's our 8 paid hours. So we left. We just simply downed tools, got changed and walked out. Left the kitchen as it was, left the food prep where it was, didn't finish prepping for the night. We did nothing. 5 minutes later I get a very angry call from the general manager who wanted me back there immediately to work the shift and finish the wedding etc., or they couldn't do it without me. I politely explained I was told to only work my 37.5 hours or it wasn't my issue, so that's what I did. The night was a disaster by all accounts and it cost the company thousands in compensation to the wedding party and in lost revenue from the restaurant, never mind the reputational damage. Didn't go back into work until the following Thursday, when my weekly hours started again. I got to keep my job, not easy to replace a pastry chef of my skill who ran the kitchen for them most of the time. One of the others got sacked as he was easily replaced and the other got his hours cut until he quit. Catering is not a nice place to work, they're real bastards. Ultimately I left about 6 months later. I got fed up of working for free as it had just gone back to normal. Left being owed about £20,000 of overtime that I never got. Company went bankrupt dodgily and destroyed all evidence of hours worked, employment records etc., so we got screwed. The same guy rebought the hotel under a new name etc., so it's all very shady. The next one is titled, An Unlocked Bank. I worked as a bank supervisor at a fairly large national bank chain for a little over 2 years. This bank is super shitty to their employees, and very penny pinching on the backside, since they spend all their play money on trying to get people in the door to open accounts. I was in charge of opening and closing the bank each day, making sure things were locked, alarms activated, money counted and correct, etc. One day, in my normal closing duties, as I am leaving, I go to lock the front door behind me, but the entire lock falls completely out of the door. Obviously I call my boss and let him know. He is upset that I'm calling him after business hours, and just tells me to put it back in and lock it. Cue malicious compliance. I have no idea how to do that, so I literally just lock the lock, and set it gently and precariously in its spot and leaving the bank unlocked. I come back in the morning, and give my boss a call during business hours to get his approval to get our locksmith out. He tells me it's expensive to call the lock company, so just not to. I send him an email to get written, documented evidence of this decision, and just let my employees know what's going on so when we get robbed, they are aware whose fault it is. I continue leaving the bank unlocked for 6 months. Eventually, we have an issue with our main vault lock as well, in which it stops locking because the electronics have failed. I report this to my boss, reminding him that the front door to the bank still does not have a functional lock. He says he'll submit the request. A week passes, and I've heard nothing, so I reach back out and he says, quote, "It will get fixed when it gets fixed." I quit working there after 2 more months of leaving all the money unlocked and the front door unlocked. My employees followed, as none of us want to be responsible for the impending massive robbery. I recently found out from a coworker that I keep in contact with from a sister branch that it was not fixed for another 6 months after I left, when the security audit came up. My boss was fired, citing massive security concerns, but somehow no one burglarized it in that time. Maybe not the most climactic ending, but it's just mind-blowing to me that we left a bank unlocked for over a year and no one really gave a shit. The next one is titled, You Want Me to Follow the Rules? Okay, I'll follow them. Worked in a prison years ago as a correctional officer. Our shift supervisors were sergeants. 4 to 12 p.m. shift was one of the busiest as we had the most activities going on during that time. Evening church service, gymnasium time, library, visitation, attorney visits, medication and sick calls, etc. etc. Meal time was always one of those times where thing had to be done quickly and without delay as it would gum up the works for everything else. Sergeants wanted it done like clockwork and without a hitch. They were also big on, inmates are given a rule book and are expected to abide by it. You as an officer should know this book inside and out, forwards and backwards, and should make sure that inmates are following it. We actually got yelled at and written up when inmates didn't follow the rules, go figure, and the only saving grace was if we gave written warning to the inmates. Can't blame the officer for the inmate not following the rules if the officer wrote it down that he told the inmate to not do something, and they didn't basically. One of the biggest issues was inmates not coming out of their cells to get their food trays on time. Half the block at a time would come out, get a tray and go back in their cells, lock up, and the other half would come out and get their trays and eat at the tables. This switched back and forth based on shift and days. Now as the officers we were expected to give 3 verbal calls for chow over the PA system for the block. First was something like 20 minutes prior to start, second like 10 minutes prior, and last was like 5 minutes prior, so the officer had time to go around and secure all the cell doors closed. They could be opened automatically but had to be manually closed to lock. After getting my rear end chewed for chow starting late by the supervisors because I had to stop at every other inmate's cell and wait for them to finish brushing their hair, put on their shoes, step out of the cell, and make sure the door was locked, for the umpteenth time I said screw it. You want to ride my butt about this? Fine, we gonna do it by the book. So I pulled out the almighty inmate rule book and found the section about feeding times, schedules and procedures. It stated, and I'm vague on the exact working as it's been ages ago, but I remember the gist of it: if an inmate refuses to exit their cell after being given the 3rd call for chow notice by the officer of the block, the officer is to secure the cell door and not provide the inmate with a tray. Basically we as officers weren't to go get a tray and take it to the inmate's cell as we weren't their butlers. Now granted we knew which cell doors were problematic and we could work around that, as sometimes an inmate would still be in their cell standing by the door waiting on us and we could call the control room and say open cell such and such again, then yank on it when we heard the motor operating in order to make sure the inmate was getting out to eat. No problem, not their fault, not ours, put in the notice to maintenance to fix it and move on. However with the "oh I'm here at the Holiday Inn and I'm going to make your life miserable because I can" crowd. If they didn't get out of their cells on time because they wanted to drag their feet, I would go by, slide the door closed, they automatically locked, and keep going to check the next cell. Yes, you guessed it, immediate, you are denying me my food, and I want a supervisor, and I'm going to gut you like a fish you dirty, you'd hear it all. I only explained the procedure about 3 or 4 times and word spread within the prison. Officers never worked the same block for more than a week or 2 before rotating. I had inmates refuse to lock up demanding to see a supervisor until inmate so-and-so got his tray delivered to his cell because he wanted to lay on his bunk and read a book. Naturally this delayed feeding the entire block as we still had half the block waiting. I'd get a call from a supervisor who was sitting in the control room watching and wanting to know why I wasn't getting chow done on time. I told them to come on over and I'd explain it as the inmates weren't listening to my instructions anyways. Supervisor comes over and starts to ream me in front of the inmates. I pull out a copy of the rule book, already open to the section and feeding times, policies and procedures, and read verbatim that once 3 calls for chow were giving if an inmate. Then I'd show the supervisor the time sheets we kept, where we made entries of all the events that happened. Inmate so-and-so left block to go to library at 16:20 hours, inmate returned from medical at 16:25 hours, etc. First call for chow given at 1700 hours, second call at 1710 and third call at 1715 hours. Supervisor looked at me, looked at the rule book, looked back at me, started to tell me to get a tray and take it to them. I said sure, just as soon as we go talk to my union representative and the warden about rewriting the rule book to accommodate the inmates' desires on any given day and time. This all happened a grand total of maybe 2 times before the supervisors caught on that they no longer had to say, follow the rule book and make sure to abide by it or you will. They knew I was doing things by the book and they never said another word to me about it. They also never told me to go get the inmate a tray and take it to them ever again. The next one is titled, You Want to Save Money by Reducing Redundancy in Our Server Infrastructure? You got it. It was in the 1990s when I worked for a software company in Germany. They developed telephone billing systems for major European carriers. The IT infrastructure was based on Windows NT 4.0 workstation and server. Each server had a redundant counterpart to ensure a functioning network all the time. Name a server type and I am sure we had it, and always in a redundancy. One day, when I was working in the air-conditioned room for the servers, I saw that the primary domain controller had some problems with the hard drives. It seemed that the SCSI controller was about to give up and the database server wasn't in a better shape. Immediately I informed the CIO about it and ordered the needed parts. So far so good until the CEO and the CFO cancelled the order and demanded that every redundant server needs to be deinstalled. I tried to tell them that the current structure is needed and demanded by the major shareholder. And to add insult to injury, I explained them that cancelling the order for urgently needed hardware components to keep the whole network running is irresponsible. Both looked at me like Snape would sneer at Harry Potter and ignored my arguments. They ordered me to do as demanded. I thought to myself, okay, they want me to sabotage the company, then they will get what they want. To cover my bases, I asked for a written order, which was given to me within an hour. I made 3 copies of it and sent the original one to the CIO and to the HR together with my resignation and asking to have my overtime to be converted to free days. When the OK came, I started to do as requested even when I knew that the whole thing will end in a disaster. Every redundant server was shut down, the hard drives formatted and the devices were returned to the storage facility. At the end of the day, I said my goodbye to my co-workers and left to never return. I knew what would happen within a week or 2, but I didn't care anymore. I had been put through so much at this company that I was glad to have quit my job. A few of my co-workers had become good friends and we still have a good connection and help each other once in a while. Well, a few days later I got a frantic call from the CIO because the whole network was down and nothing was working. The PDC crashed spectacularly and the database server had followed right after. My reply was, sorry, but I don't work for you guys anymore and I am on vacation. Good luck and goodbye. I complied with the request made by the upper echelon of the company while maliciously wishing them to be chewed by the major shareholder, which then happened and the company went down pretty fast. The last one is titled, Try Not to Think. Alright, I won't. I signed up for a startup job that said they needed my skills earlier this year. During the interview, they advertised themselves as experienced businessmen trying something new, needing someone with my skills because they had no one with that kind of experience. Open to changing as the market did. I said I wanted to learn more about some of the tangentially related aspects of my field to grow, and they said it would be a good fit. So I took the job for 2 quarters of the year, with a set exit point. A very important note, my pay was coming from a third party with interest in both the startup and development of people from my city. So while I was their employee, I was pretty explicitly there for the learning experience instead of the pay. This company was proposing a tech solution for restaurants. The pandemic hit, and I started about 2 weeks later, right as the racial tensions in the US reached their peak. I meet with my new boss, excited to get started, and they let me know they made a last-minute hire of a friend, part-time, who's going to be my supervisor. I was paid for full-time hours for a pretty demanding, constantly shifting environment, but my direct supervisor was only going to be working 15 hours a week. The person who hired me, founder, says that he'll be largely unavailable to me because of how busy he'll be, and I should refer to new supervisor instead. So there goes that learning environment I signed up for. Strike 1. I meet with my new supervisor, and before literally anything else come out of his mouth, I know things are pretty hard for you people right now, so just know that I understand if your work is lower quality than it usually would be. Ah yes, judging me by the color of my skin before you know literally anything else about me. Strike number 2. Next meeting with supervisor and boss, and they want to donate to BLM. Op, can you write a report on what charities we should donate to? We think you'd know best. This has literally nothing to do with my job description, and isn't even tangentially related to our business. They're clearly only asking me because I was the only person of color at the company at that point. I asked if we had any black business owner partners, and they say no. I told them, this is going to come off as tone deaf and we shouldn't do it. It has nothing to do with our product, our partners are literally all white men, and we're offering less than $500 in donations. It'd be better to try and invite some black business owners and focus on community development. They tell me to do it anyways, and that it will be the only work for me during my first 2 weeks. Then, once I've written the report, a white accountant on the team says, this will come off as tone deaf and I don't think we should do it. So we don't. Strike 3. You're out. But I'm a professional, so I covered my bases before giving up. I speak with the program organizing third party, and they tell me they can't switch my company. They give me some tips for fitting in better, and I spend a few weeks doing literally anything they ask, as well as I can. I get several weeks' worth of work done in very little time, even doing side projects to try and show how capable I am at my job. I speak directly with my supervisor, comparing my current workload with previous jobs and stating explicitly that I feel I could be better utilized if they'd give me a chance. Showing my work to my sponsor, they start giving me side projects because they're impressed. But every time I turn in a project to the tech restaurant place, one of the co-founders, who, like me, worked his way up in the world, tells me how fantastic it is. That it meets every standard he has, and he's excited to show it to his partner. Once the boss sees it, he nitpicks it apart, saying it's not what he wanted. There were times he edited me in circles, having me change A to B, then B to C, then C to A, and asking why I didn't just do A in the first place. I try to explain why doing what he asks is against best practice, or hurts our customers in 1,000 different ways. Based on our board members' feedback when I was at the meetings, everyone but him is on the same page. But if it's not his idea, he hates it. And if it's from young, black me, then he especially hates it. Finally, this tech restaurant business sits me down after the first quarter for a performance review. Unlike normal businesses, they didn't ask for any feedback for them, they just wanted to tell me that I was too opinionated, trying too hard, that I should try not to think so much about the work. So, I do. I stop doing extra projects for them, and start taking up more well-paid side gigs. Like, really well paid. $50 an hour with performance bonuses is normal for my position, and this startup is throwing that away. Eventually they have me write a single blog post every week instead of doing my job. I'm excluded from pretty much any meeting that wasn't contractually required. Their sales plummet as I stop pushing back against bad business practices, to the point that I started graphing it in an Excel spreadsheet. They went from $10,000 a month to $200 a week, with several weeks with no sales. I'm getting forwarded customer complaints by the good founder, and my response is, "Oh man, yeah, that seems like a problem. I could fix it, but you'll need to get permission from direct supervisor." Direct supervisor, friend of the bad boss, turns out to have way less time available than even the 15 hours, and is almost never responding. When I tell him the good founder wants me to work on a project, he says that he doesn't think I can handle it and shouldn't worry about it. So I don't. Repeat, repeat, repeat. Second quarter over, and I remind the bad founder that I was leaving. I put together a folder of all of the things they'd need from me, as well as detailed instructions on how to move over permissions from my account. Instead of doing that, they just leave everything as is. Now 2020 is over. I've made good money this last quarter, working for the sponsor company and other contracts. My new jobs really appreciate all that I'm doing for them, and some of them even sent me Christmas presents. I still get phone notifications about the startup's weekly sales because they never turn them off, and it's gone down to 2 orders or less a week. What's especially funny to me is that the account sending me the notification is licensed at a pretty penny, so they're incompetent enough that they're paying extra money to update me every week. A couple of grand a year. Friend of a friend told me their potential investors pulled out after I left, since the bad boss thought he could do it all on his own. Several board members have jumped ship. There were only the 2 co-founders left once I headed out at the end of the second quarter. Even my old supervisor left, and their website says that's still the case. They've stopped offering live support or refunds, and started getting some pretty poor reviews from clients. I'll be surprised if they last. If they do, I'm sure they'll get a nice Twitter welcome in a few years once they try to hire another POC person, and they treat them with the racism they doled out to me. Thanks for listening.